She kept texting first. Not because she was desperate, because her brain was wired for abandonment. Imagine you're sitting on the floor of your bathroom at 2 a.m. Not crying. Past crying. Just staring at your phone. You've sent 6 messages in 3 hours. He's read all of them. The little, delivered, has turned to, read. Every single time. He just hasn't responded. And the worst part? You know exactly what you're going to do tomorrow. You are going to apologize. For texting too much. For caring too much. For being, as he said before, more than once, too much. You'll say sorry. He'll say it's fine. He'll pull you close for exactly long enough that the terror in your chest quiets down. And then, slowly, over the next few days, he'll start pulling away again. Getting distant. Going quiet. And the whole cycle will start over. You'll tell yourself this is love. You'll tell yourself this is what love feels like. But here's the question I want you to sit with today. What if it isn't love? What if what you are feeling isn't love, but a nervous system that was trained, years before you ever met him, to mistake panic for passion? Her name is Maya. She's 26. She lives in Los Angeles. And for 11 months, she was convinced she was broken. She wasn't. But nobody told her that until it was almost too late. Maya grew up in Phoenix, Arizona. Middle child. Smart. The kind of girl who got straight A's and made it look effortless, who had a lot of friends but somehow always felt slightly on the outside of every room she walked into. Her mom was warm, but inconsistent. There were months where everything was close and connected, Sunday dinners, long talks, real intimacy. And then there were stretches, when stress hit the family, when things got hard, where her mom would go emotionally cold. Not cruel. Just absent. Somewhere else behind her eyes. Her dad traveled for work. When he was home, everything felt safer. When he left, something in the house shifted. Maya learned early that love was not a guaranteed thing. She learned that people you needed could disappear without warning. That warmth could vanish before you understood where it went. And that the safest thing you could do, the best strategy, was to watch very, very carefully for signs that someone was about to pull away. And act fast. Do something. Fix it. Before they left. She didn't know it at the time. She was just a kid trying to feel secure. But that strategy, that hypervigilance, that compulsive need to close the gap whenever someone got distant, it didn't stay in childhood. It followed her into every relationship she ever had. By her early 20s, Maya had a pattern. She fell hard and fast. She was deeply loyal. She was, by all accounts, a wonderful girlfriend. Attentive, thoughtful, communicative. And she consistently ended up with men who were emotionally unavailable. She'd call it bad luck. Her friends called it a type. Neither of them were right. But we'll get to that. In the spring of her 25th year, Maya met a man named Daniel at a rooftop party in Silver Lake. He was 31. He was handsome in a quiet way, the kind of handsome that doesn't announce itself. He was a documentary filmmaker. He had opinions about things. He made her laugh 3 times in the first 10 minutes. And he did something that most of the men Maya had dated never did. He seemed genuinely interested in her. He asked questions. He remembered things she said. He texted her that same night, just a photo of something they talked about at the party, a small callback, a signal that she'd stayed in his mind. Maya thought, finally, someone who isn't going to make me work so hard. She had no idea she was standing at the entrance to the most exhausting 11 months of her life. The first 2 months were, by Maya's own description, extraordinary. Daniel was present. He was engaged. He planned dates, not grand gestures, but thoughtful ones. A hike to a specific viewpoint because she mentioned once that she liked views. A hole-in-the-wall ramen place she'd never been to. Small evidence that he was paying attention. He opened up about his life. His complicated relationship with his father. A project he'd failed on. His fear that his best work was still ahead of him, and also, quietly, that it might not be. Maya met those moments with everything she had. She was warm. She was present. She made him feel seen. And for a little while, it worked. But here's the thing about the anxious-avoidant trap. It doesn't start with distance. It starts with closeness. It starts with a level of intimacy that feels almost too good. Almost overwhelming. Overwhelming enough that one person, the avoidant one, starts to feel something they've been trained to fear their whole lives. They start to feel dependent. And that, for Daniel, was the trigger. Around week 9, Maya noticed the first shift. It was small. He took longer to respond to texts. Not hours, just longer than he usually did. Maybe 30 minutes instead of 5. She noticed. She did not say anything. She told herself she was being paranoid. But her nervous system had already logged it. The next week, he cancelled plans. Work emergency. Completely legitimate. He apologized. She said it was fine. But the emergency passed. And the rescheduling never quite happened with the same urgency that it used to. Maya started double texting. Not long messages, just little check-ins. Hey, how's the edit going? Saw something that made me think of you. Small digital breadcrumbs she was leaving, trying to feel the shape of where he was. Some of them, he answered immediately. Warm, engaged, like the early days. Those responses flooded her with relief, a relief that felt, honestly, chemically intense. Some of them, he didn't answer at all. And those silences, those small, seemingly ordinary silences, began to consume her. Here is something important to understand. For most people, a delayed text response is mildly annoying. For someone with an anxious attachment style, someone whose nervous system was trained in childhood to treat withdrawal as a threat, a delayed text response is not mildly annoying. It activates something that feels closer to danger. The body responds. Cortisol rises. Attention narrows. The brain begins running threat assessment the same way it would if someone had pointed a gun at you. That sounds extreme. But it isn't a metaphor. This is what researchers call a hyperactivated attachment system. Maya wasn't being dramatic. Her brain was doing exactly what it had been trained to do. And Daniel, without knowing it, was doing exactly what his brain had been trained to do, too. Because here is what nobody tells you about avoidant attachment. Avoidant people don't pull away because they don't care. They pull away because closeness, real closeness, the kind that makes you feel like you need someone, is the most terrifying thing they know how to feel. Daniel had his own history. A mother who was loving but smothering. A sense, growing up, that the price of love was losing yourself. That closeness meant engulfment. That need was weakness. He hadn't consciously decided to start withdrawing from Maya. His nervous system had made that decision for him. And now the trap was set. Maya reaches out. Daniel feels the pressure of her need and withdraws. Maya, sensing the withdrawal, reaches out more urgently. Daniel feels even more engulfed and pulls further back. Maya's anxiety spikes. She reaches out again. Cycle. Reset. Repeat. By month 5, they were fighting. Not explosive fights. Quiet ones. The kind where one person says, I just feel like you've been distant lately, and the other person says, I'm just busy. Why do you always make everything such a big deal? Maya began to believe something was wrong with her. Daniel, to his credit, was not doing this deliberately. But he had started using a word that would stick to Maya like a splinter under skin. He called her intense. And then, a few weeks later, a variation, too much. Not screamed. Said quietly, with a kind of exhausted resignation that made it worse. Maya, you're a lot sometimes. She went home that night and sat with those words for hours. She tried to make herself smaller. She tried, actively, consciously, to need less. And if you've ever tried that, if you've ever tried to surgically remove your own emotional needs because someone made you feel like those needs were an inconvenience, you know what happens. It doesn't work. The needs don't go away. They go underground. And they come back louder. Month 9. Maya is at a dinner party at a friend's apartment in Echo Park. Daniel is not there. Daniel has been really slammed with the project for 6 weeks. They've seen each other twice in that time. Both times felt rushed. Both times, she went home feeling hollower than when she arrived. At the dinner party, someone she doesn't know well, a woman named Priya, asks her casually, how's your guy? And Maya opens her mouth to say fine. And she starts crying instead. Not just tearing up. Crying. The kind that comes from somewhere under the floor, that you didn't know was there until the ground opens. She excused herself to the balcony. Priya followed. And in the next 20 minutes, Maya said out loud, for the first time, what had been true for months. She said, I don't even know if I like who I am when I'm with him anymore. I'm always waiting. I'm always watching for signals. I check my phone constantly. I rehearse what I'm going to say before I say it because I'm scared of how he'll react. I've stopped telling my friends things because I don't want to hear them tell me to break up with him. I feel crazy. I feel like I'm losing my mind. And I don't know if it's him or me. Priya said something simple. She said, what would it feel like to not be scared of losing him? Maya thought about it for a long time. She said, I have no idea. I don't know what that feels like. 3 weeks later, it ended. Not in a dramatic blowout. Not with revelations or confessions. Daniel said, in the careful, measured way he said most things, that he thought they wanted different things. That he cared about her but that sometimes the relationship felt heavy. that he needed space to focus on his work. Maya said okay. She drove home on the 101 with all the windows down even though it was November and she was shaking from the cold. She didn't cry. She felt something stranger than crying. She felt like a person who had been holding their breath for so long they had forgotten what normal felt like. She felt, underneath the grief, the faintest, most fragile suggestion of relief. But she also felt something that would take months to untangle. She felt like she had been right. She had always known, somewhere in her nervous system, that he was going to leave. She had spent 11 months trying to prevent it. And it had happened anyway. And the story she told herself, the story she lived inside for the next several weeks, was, I drove him away. I was too much. This is what I do. This is what I always do. That story was wrong. But it would take a long time before she understood why. Let's talk about what was actually happening. In 2010, psychiatrist Amir Levine and researcher Rachel Heller published a book called Attached. It drew on decades of scientific research, going all the way back to British psychiatrist John Bowlby's foundational work on attachment theory in the 1950s and 60s, to make an argument that would quietly change how millions of people understood their relationships. The argument was this. The way we were cared for as children, specifically, how consistently and safely our early caregivers responded to our emotional needs, shapes our nervous system. It creates a template. A default setting for how we experience closeness, how we respond to perceived rejection or abandonment, and what we unconsciously seek in romantic partners. There are three main attachment styles. Secure, roughly 50% of the population. Anxious, roughly 20%. Avoidant, roughly 25%. Secure people had caregivers who were consistently emotionally available. They internalized the message, people I love will come back. I am safe to need things. Intimacy is not dangerous. Anxious people, like Maya, had caregivers who were inconsistent. Sometimes warm. Sometimes emotionally absent. The child learned, I can't predict when love will be available. I have to work for it. I have to be vigilant. I have to act before the warmth disappears. The result is a hyperactivated attachment system. One that is finely tuned to the tiniest signal of potential abandonment. One that responds to emotional distance the way a smoke alarm responds to smoke, immediately, loudly, with the full force of the nervous system. This is not a character flaw. This is neuroscience. Avoidant people, like Daniel, had the opposite experience. Their caregivers were often emotionally smothering, or they equated closeness with loss of self. They learned, needing people is dangerous. Dependency is weakness. The safest thing I can do is not need anyone. The result is a deactivated attachment system. One that, when relationships get too close, too real, too emotionally intense, automatically begins creating distance. Not out of cruelty. Out of protection. Now here is the trap. Anxious and avoidant people are magnetically drawn to each other. Not randomly. Not because they're both broken. But because something in each of them recognizes the other's pattern as familiar. The anxious person, used to inconsistent love, finds the avoidant person's hot and cold dynamic familiar. The avoidant person, used to emotional smothering, finds the anxious person's desperate attention confirming of their belief that closeness is dangerous. They meet. They feel chemistry. They feel like they've finally found something real. And then they begin, slowly and completely unconsciously, to activate each other's deepest wounds. The anxious person reaches out. The avoidant person feels engulfed and pulls back. The anxious person, whose threat response just activated, reaches out more intensely. The avoidant person feels even more engulfed, pulls back harder. The cycle accelerates. Researchers have called this dynamic the most common and most volatile pairing in Western dating culture. Not because the people are incompatible on paper. Not because they don't care for each other. But because their nervous systems are running programs that are fundamentally at odds. Programs written before they were old enough to choose. Programs that, without awareness, run on autopilot, creating suffering that both people will eventually blame on themselves or on each other, without ever understanding the actual source. Maya called herself crazy. Daniel called her too much. Neither of them were right. They were two nervous systems doing exactly what they had been trained to do. And without someone naming it, without a framework for what was happening, they had no chance. For the first few weeks after the breakup, Maya did what most people do. She convinced herself it was salvageable. She wrote long messages to Daniel in her notes app that she didn't send. She cycled through anger and grief and a strange longing that she couldn't fully explain, because truthfully, the relationship had not been making her happy. But the loss of it still felt like the removal of something essential. She also, for the first time, noticed a pattern across her relationship history. Every serious relationship she'd had, Every person she'd felt the most intensely about. They all had a similar quality. A kind of emotional withholding. A tendency to run hot and cold. A push-pull that she had always attributed to passion, to chemistry, to the fact that love is just complicated. She started talking to a therapist. A woman in Culver City who specialized in attachment trauma. In their third session, the therapist put a name to what Maya had been experiencing her whole adult life. She said, "You are anxiously attached. And you've been consistently choosing avoidant partners. Not because you're self-destructive, but because the anxious nervous system tends to interpret the distance of avoidant partners as evidence that love requires effort. And you were taught, early on, that love that comes easily is somehow not real." Maya said that felt uncomfortably accurate. Over the next several months, something slow and uncomfortable began. She started recognizing the signs. She started noticing, in new people she dated, the patterns she'd once mistaken for chemistry. The man who texted constantly for 2 weeks and then went quiet. The one who was breathtakingly present on dates and somehow always vague about the future. The ones whose inconsistency she had always read as depth, as mystery, as proof that they were interesting. She started recognizing the feeling she'd always called butterflies for what it actually was. Low-grade anxiety. The relief of a return text, that flood of warmth and safety, she started recognizing that for what it was, too. The relief of a nervous system briefly calmed. Not love. The temporary easing of a threat response. That was painful to see. It's painful to see, when you realize that what you thought was intensity was actually dysregulation. That what you thought was love was, at least in part, a nervous system stuck in a loop it had been running since you were 7 years old. But here is the thing about seeing something clearly. Once you see it, you can start choosing differently. Maya is 27 now. She's been in therapy for 8 months. She went on a few dates with a man she initially described to her friends as nice but almost too stable. Like, "I don't feel that spark." Her therapist asked her, "What do you mean by spark?" Maya was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I think I mean anxiety." That was a turning point. 3 things I want you to take from Maya's story today. The first one is this: anxious attachment is not a personality flaw. It is a nervous system response to an unpredictable early environment. If you grew up with a caregiver who was sometimes warm and sometimes emotionally absent, or if you experienced early loss, inconsistency, or emotional unpredictability, your nervous system may have been wired to treat the possibility of abandonment as an active threat. This is not weakness. It is adaptation. But it is an adaptation that stops serving you the moment it starts running your adult relationships. The second thing is this: the most intense connections are not always the healthiest ones. This is genuinely hard to internalize, because our entire cultural story about love, in movies, in music, in every piece of media we consume, tells us that love is supposed to feel electric. Consuming. Like something you can't control. Like something that keeps you up at night. But if the thing keeping you up at night is anxiety, if the intensity you feel is tied to uncertainty, to fear of losing someone, to the relief of getting a text back, that is not the electricity of love. That is the electricity of a dysregulated nervous system. And it is addictive in the same way any intense emotional experience can be addictive, because the relief when the anxiety eases feels, in that moment, better than almost anything else. Security, by contrast, can feel quiet, understated, almost boring, to a nervous system that is used to running at red alert. The invitation, and this is not easy, is to begin learning to tell the difference between peace and boredom. Because what feels like boredom to an anxiously attached nervous system might be exactly what love is supposed to feel like. The third thing is this: neither Maya nor Daniel was the villain. This is important. Because the most comforting story, when a relationship ends painfully, is to assign blame. He was emotionally unavailable. She was too needy. But those are just descriptions of nervous system states, not character verdicts. Daniel was not doing anything to Maya. He was running a program that was designed to keep him emotionally safe. Maya was not doing anything to Daniel. She was running a program that was designed to prevent abandonment. The tragedy is not that either of them was bad. The tragedy is that neither of them had the framework to see what was actually happening, until the relationship had already burned through both of them. So here are 3 things to watch for in your own relationships. Watch for the anxiety loop. If you find yourself constantly checking your phone, over-analyzing responses, feeling a spike of relief when they text you and a spike of dread when they don't, that is your attachment system talking. That is worth paying attention to. Watch for the pattern, not just the person. If this feels familiar, if the push-pull, the hot and cold, the feeling of never quite being on solid ground, if this shows up across more than one relationship, the common thread isn't bad luck. It's a pattern that lives in you, and it is asking to be looked at. And finally, watch for what you call chemistry. The next time you feel that intense, almost dizzying pull towards someone, the kind that feels like you'd do anything to keep them close, pause. Ask yourself one question. Is this warmth? Or is this relief? Your nervous system will tell you the truth, if you learn to listen to it. Maya's story doesn't end with a perfect relationship. It doesn't end with complete healing, either. That's not how this works. It ends with awareness. With a woman sitting in a therapist's office in Culver City, laughing at the fact that she'd spent years chasing the feeling of anxiety and calling it love. And beginning, slowly, imperfectly, some days more successfully than others, to choose differently. That is not a small thing. That is everything. If you recognized yourself anywhere in Maya's story today, in the midnight phone checks, in the over-explaining, in the relief that came with the return text, I want you to know this. You are not too much. You are not broken. You are someone whose nervous system learned a lesson too early about how to survive in a world where love felt unpredictable. And lessons learned that young can be unlearned. It's slower than we'd like. It's harder than it sounds. But it's possible. Leave a comment and tell me, have you ever mistaken anxiety for chemistry? I read every single one of those. If today's episode hit close to home, sharing it is how more people find this space. It takes 1 second and it might reach someone who genuinely needs to hear it. And subscribe, because next week's episode is one of the most disturbing stories we've covered yet. A woman in Florida, 38 years old, spent 3 years leaving a narcissistic marriage. She survived it. She built a new life. She thought it was over. But the moment she walked out that door, her ex-husband turned to the one source of power he had left. Their children. Her 12-year-old son eventually stood in front of a court counselor and told him that his mother was dangerous. The words were not his own. That's next week. The title is, He Couldn't Control Her Anymore. So he started working on the children. And I'll tell you right now, it will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about what abuse looks like after the relationship ends. See you then.